people of the Dallas police back in the 70s. He interviewed Jesse Curry, Emmett McDonald, who is the copper who got hit in the face, apparently, by Oswald with the gun, blah, blah, blah. And Gerald Hill as well, he interviewed him. So there's about 3 people, and the thing that actually kicked it off was a tape I got from Malcolm. I'll talk about all this more tomorrow, but in a nutshell, it's one of the tapes, in the bag of tapes, there was a tape with Mary Farrell by Jeff Meek. And it was kind of funny how he actually really straightforward the way he asked the questions. That tape is online at this point, so at some point you'll be able to click on it and watch it on YouTube and such. And he asked really astute questions and lets her talk and lets her finish. And it was just a really pleasant way of the way he does these interviews. The interviews with Hill and Curry and McDonald, they're also online. You can just find them on YouTube. Just type in Jeff Meek and McDonald or Hill or whatsoever, and it will pop up as such. Right, are you doing the dialogue here? Yeah. I thought it was time for a chat anyway, so.
Hello.
Hi, Jeff.
Yes.
Jeff, it's Bart from DP UK.
Hi, Bart. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Doing just fine.
Awesome, awesome. Are you ready?
I am, sir.
Okay, great. Okay, so this is just going to be a really straightforward Q&A. I'm just going to ask a few questions, starting from the beginning. I've got this PDF up, the one that you sent me. Although it says how you actually got involved with about investigating the JFK assassination. It basically says that you were watching the Geraldo show and you saw Robert Groden basically presenting the Zapruder film. Was that actually the pivotal moment for you to get into it, or was it before that?
No, that's what got me going. I remember, I think it was in '73, there was a film came out with Burt Lancaster and Robert Ryan, and it was called Executive Action, and I remember going to see that, and they had a little newspaper handout that they gave out in the lobby, and I kept that, and I read through it and kind of underlined some things, but I just put it away, and can't say that it stayed on my mind for any length of time. And then when I stayed up to watch that Geraldo Rivera show, actually I stayed up to do so to see Raquel Welch. Groden and Dick Gregory were on, and they started talking about the assassination and a conspiracy, and I was like, well, I remember that program I saw. They were just mentioning several things that I'd never heard of, and they said they were going to devote their next show, the whole show to it, so I borrowed a tape recorder and tape recorded it, and they were talking about books and other things, and I was very skeptical, and so I got the books, and they were footnoted, and I sent to Washington for the documents that they were referring to, and by golly, some of the things that they were saying were true. And then after that, it just, for about 10 years, I just dug in big time. That was March of '75. By December of '75, I was in Dallas interviewing people, and went back down the following December of '76. Wrote a manuscript in '77, which I just had published. It's called The Lone Gunman. We can talk about that later if you want.
Yeah, sure.
That just came out last week. But it just I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. And as you guys know, who have investigated this yourself, one thing leads to another and another and another and another, and a lot of it just didn't add up. And of course, being able to spend some time with Mary Farrell back in 1976 and 1977 was a real blessing because back then, I don't think anybody wrote a book without conferring with her. And when I was there the first time, kind of a English connection, Michael Eddowes, you guys know Michael Eddowes? He was there. And he was researching his book, Kennedy Killed Khrushchev, was his first version. And then he came out with the Oswald files thereafter. So, I got to meet him, which was kind of interesting. And Mary would, she was still working, and she would leave a pile of documents on the kitchen table for me to read during the day. And I mean, it could be anywhere from 4 to 6 inches tall. It was a bunch of stuff she'd leave me. And I'd read through it and make some notes, and she'd get home, and that evening we'd talk about it. And I just was very fortunate to be able to spend some time with her. And I used to correspond a lot with Paul Hoke. You guys probably know that name. And just was able to spend some time and lots of correspondence with a lot of people who got into it, before I did, and really knew their stuff, and were willing to share it.
Can I ask you, how, the whole thing on the Geraldo show made you aware of the whole thing, but were you actually aware of course you were probably aware of the assassination, but about all the troubles surrounding the war on the court and so forth in the years preceding that show, the Geraldo show episode?
Yeah, I knew there was a report. I was 13 years old when it happened, and I remember where I was, like so many others do, and I remember that a report came out, and Oswald, was the sole assassin, and Ruby was the sole person who killed Oswald, and there was no conspiracy and all that. But for the next several years there, I was a teenager. My goal was to become a professional baseball player.
Right.
I ended up going to college on a baseball scholarship, but didn't go any farther than that. And I didn't really pay much attention to it. Right. I can remember there would just be something in the paper every once in a while. I can't really be more specific than that. I'm guessing some of that might have been the Garrison investigation there in 67, 68. But definitely seeing the Zapruder film and hearing Grodin talk and Dick Gregory talk, that really that was the beginning of the, oh my gosh, you're kidding. And like I said, for the next 10 years, it was almost an obsession. I mean, I've got piles of correspondence from back in the day. I've kept all that. And my interest kind of came in waves. From 75 to probably 86 or 7, I was, almost obsessed with it. And then kind of went away for a few years, and then Oliver Stone's movie came out, and everybody was interested in it again. And then there was another whole wave of books. Many, many books came out. And that got me going again, and started making phone calls. And I don't know if you know the name Frank Regano. He wrote Mob Lawyer.
Yeah. Some of us do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. He and I were in a lot of touch on the telephone over time. And to be very honest with you, one day I walked out of one of our bedrooms after talking to him, and my wife met me in the hallway and said, "What are you doing talking to mafia lawyers? We've got 2 little kids here." And I thought, well, yeah, you're right. And I remember back in 76 and 75, 76, 77, when I was talking a lot with Mary, I asked her, has there ever been a time where you were kind of scared about any of this? And she said to me, only when I was looking at the mob. And I don't remember if she said anything else or not. And I remembered that when my wife Jean said, what are you doing talking to these mafia guys? And so I kind of backed off then, but I always had an eye on it. I bought a book or 2 over the next, 10 years, 12 years or so.
Which ones?
Something that seemed, which ones? came out, let me think for a second. About that time, let's see, The People versus Lee Harvey Oswald, Walt Brown, Mortal Air, about that, Killing the Truth by Harrison Livingstone, The Last Investigation by Gates and Fonzie. And I got the House Committee on Assassination report, and I called their volumes. And read those at least once, but not in the last many years. There was also a book that came out on the film, JFK, the book of the film, about that one. Mafia Kingfish, Reasonable Doubt by Henry Hurt. There were several good books that came out right then. And then I remember when Gerald Posner's book, Case Closed, came out. I don't remember how this came about, but somehow I was contacted by Real Crime Book Digest magazine to write a counter piece, which I did. And they published it in I think it was 93, January issue of 93, 94. And then Robert Gimberling, FBI agent Robert Gimberling, who was involved in the investigation there in Dallas, he and I spoke on the phone some. He kind of ripped me in a subsequent issue, but I noticed that he didn't rip my conclusions. He ripped me personally.
Oh, wow.
And I kind of got, very honestly, I kind of got a kick out of that because apparently you can't find fault with what I've countered with, so you've chosen to take it out of me, I guess. So, and then just, we were living in Illinois until 2005, and my wife and I were both in education. We retired and moved here to Arkansas, where we live on a lake in a beautiful community called Hot Springs Village. And one thing led to another, and I ended up working for a newspaper. I became managing editor of the Hot Springs Village Voice newspaper back in 2015. And I'm not sure if you know this or not, but in our November 2018 issue, we had an insert, and it was a magazine that I put together. And we called it Remembering 11/22/63. And it had several interviews that I did from, let's see, between February of 2018 and October of 2018. And that all came about one night we were out with friends for supper. And somehow it came up that I knew about the Kennedy assassination. So there was a couple we were out with, so what do you think? And one thing led to another, and I'm just kind of spitting out all these names. And I have hours and hours and hours of these old cassette tapes of programs and interviews and stuff. And a friend of mine had a machine where you could convert those to a CD. So I borrowed that, and I filled 60 4-hour CDs with programming that I had. So while I'm sitting here at the table listening to that, these names are coming up. And, I'm thinking, oh, that's this guy, and that's that guy. And I remember the name Mike Howard came up in one of these programs that I was, converting from a tape to a CD. So while I'm sitting there doing that, I'm looking on my cell phone and I'm Googling these names to confirm for myself that, that's who this is. And I did Mike Howard. I was thinking, hey, that's a Secret Service agent that protected the Oswalds. And so I looked at my phone, and yeah, that was him. And I also saw on my phone where he lived. And our son had recently moved to Frisco, Texas. And Mike lived close to that. In fact, we would go right through the town where he lived. And I thought, I wonder if he'd talk to me. So in February of 2018, I contacted him, and we kind of chatted off and on a little bit. And I ended up interviewing him at length twice, once in February, once in March. And of course, that got me really interested again. And I don't know how much you want to go into that, but he has a very interesting take on the whole thing based on actually some missing evidence in the Warren report. I don't know if you want to go into that at all? Or?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was going to talk about the actual conversations you've had on tape. I don't think there's many people in this room that's going to subscribe to what Mike Howard actually says.
Yeah.
You know, you know, it goes from disinfo clown to straight barefaced liar. But yeah, but of course it's interesting. There's still, even though there's many things that all of us aren't really agreeing on what he says, there are still bits in there that are of interest, because he's one of the few people that was actually very close, and especially to Maureen Oswald in the days after the assassination and such.
Yeah, the part of the interviews that really hit me, in fact, it didn't even hit me at the time. When we got done with the final interview, he and his wife and me and my wife, we went out for lunch, and I got to thinking, really, is that what he's trying to say here? So I said, Mike, are you telling me that you think Oswald was shooting at Connolly? And he said, yes, I told you that. And I said, well, I don't think you really came out that clear. When we get back from lunch, I got to get you on tape again. And his contention is that when they went back to Ruth Payne's house, according to Mike, they went back to Ruth Payne's house for Marina to get some baby clothes. And Marina pointed out where Oswald's address book was. And the FBI and Secret Service had been there, but they didn't notice it in amongst these other books. So they're going through it, and Mike says that there was a page in there where I will kill Connolly, I will kill Walker, I will kill the vice president. And he turned all that over, and then when the Warren Commission report came out, that page was missing. And if you look, I think it's in volume 16, exhibit 18, it really does look like there's a page that's been torn out. And the numbering at the bottom shows, you know, page 19, and then it shows page 22. So there is a page missing. And according to Mike, that page said, I will kill Connolly, I will kill Walker, I will kill the vice president. So that was really interesting. And there's been two books that have come out on that. One that's not much known about called Tragic Truth. The author only did 300 copies, I think. But that was really interesting to me. I had never explored that angle. And so that, you know, that kind of got me going to see if I could find some other people. And I was fortunate enough to interview by telephone Ruth Payne. And here in town, there were some people who were witnesses there, either in the plaza or on the motorcade route. One in particular, I'm sorry?
Bill and Gail Newman.
Yes. But some others, you know, not famous at all, like, you know, people who lived here, Donna Rector and Georgia Riddell and Bill Veal. They shared their story with me. And also, here in Hot Springs Village, Dr. Walter Wyrick was a medical student at Parkland at this time. And he shared his story of when all this came to pass there at Parkland Hospital, and his basically being a gopher for Lady Bird. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all. But he was on his way upstairs to a lecture, and you know, word came that Kennedy was coming, and so he went back downstairs, and he was working in the blood bank to make a little extra money. And he actually started, according to Walter, he was taking blood to Trauma Room 1 and was stopped, and a nurse took it. And I asked him if he remembered the nurse's name, but he didn't. And so he's just kind of standing around outside, and Mrs. Johnson asked him if he knew where the switchboard room was. And he said, yeah, and she said, take me there. So they go to the switchboard room, and Lady Bird, if I remember right, Walter said, you know, quite forcefully, Lady Bird said, no calls, in or out. And so Dr. Wyrick, he said, you know, well, I'm done. He started to walk away, and she said, where do you think you're going, Sonny? And so he stopped, and she said, is there a room where we could have like a press conference? And so he took her to the room where apparently they had the big press conference that was shown on television and all of that. And then he went back to work at the blood bank. So, I mean, he didn't shed any light on a conspiracy or the fight that broke out, you know, with Earl Rose and the authorities and all that, but kind of an interesting story about him and Lady Bird. And then I went back to Dallas, actually to Irving, Texas. I had gone to Dallas to take some pictures and just do some man-on-the-street interviews for our magazine. And I got permission from the 6th floor museum at Daily Plaza to actually take pictures in the museum, you know, before it opened one day. And then another one of my goals was to get high up in a building to get some, you know, like a wide-angle look at Daily Plaza, again, for the magazine. And in the building, a block down the street, it's that red brick building. I'm drawing a blank now on the name of it. It's like a Texas History Museum in there. And I asked to speak to the executive director, and he came down, and I gave him my business card, and told him what I was up to, and actually I asked him if I could get up on the roof. And he said, no, but I can take you up to the 4th floor. And there's windows there that were just perfect for pictures there. So while I'm snapping away, he said, do you know who Ruth Payne is? And I said, yeah. And he said, did you know they turned her home into a museum? And I said, no. And he said, it's really cool. It's got like these holograms. Like you go in Oswald's bedroom and there's this hologram of Ruth and Marina talking. And so, you know, I had to go see that after hearing all that. So I made arrangements, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks later to go back and go through that with the fellow who runs that, Kevin Kendrow, there in the city of Irving. And it was really neat. I mean, you go in the garage and it's like there's Dallas police officers in there. It's really well done. What they did is they hired, I don't know if they hired or they were volunteers, but they got local college students and people, and they created a script based on transcripts, you know, and testimonies and so on. It's very, very well done. Well, getting to know Kevin, you know, with the museum there at Ruth Payne's house, I said, do you think you could get me in touch with Ruth Payne? And he said, well, I could give her your information. And I said, okay, please do. So I wrote him an email like I was writing to Ruth, and he forwarded it to Ruth. And sure enough, she called and consented to an interview, so we did that over the telephone. And also when I was down there and did, you know, the little tour of the house there in Irving, Texas, I also had set up an opportunity to meet with Robert Grogan. And we interviewed for some time. And I was always wondered how in the world he was able to show that film and not get in trouble about it. So he gave me the backstory about how he came across the film, and I think as Robert put it, let's just say there was an extra copy made. And he talked about how ABC almost pulled out of the deal, but Geraldo, who had a lot of clout back then, you know, talked them into going ahead with it, which they did. And you know, and I've said this to Robert Grogan, not to flatter him, but to, you know, I'm serious, I mean it. I wonder, would there have ever been a House Select Committee on Assassinations had he not shown that film? Because what you guys all know, you know, all the investigations that followed. So I mean, that guy had a lot to do with, you know, moving the case forward in terms of investigation there in the late 70s. So that was a real thrill to get to spend some time with him. I had met him years ago, and of course he wouldn't remember me from Adam. But he was, you know, we correspond a little bit now and then, and I got a copy of his latest book, which he only made 2,000 copies of. but that was really fun to start to get to know him. And so putting all those, I spoke with my boss about all these interviews I'm collecting, and I said, I think we can make a magazine out of this. And she said, yeah, I do too. So we did, and that came out in our November 20th issue, along with pictures I took in 2017 and 18 and back in the 1970s. And it was an insert in our November 20th issue. In the beginning of that magazine, it's just kind of a backstory on how I got into all this.
Yeah.
And part of that was the manuscript that I wrote in '77 and Mary typed for me. And it's so much easier now to get something published. I thought, well, I'm going to publish that darn thing.
Well, can I just interrupt?
Sure.
I just want to go back in
Sure,
time.
anytime. Interrupt whenever you want.
I just want to go back in time.
or I'll just keep rambling.
I just want to go back into time a little bit, because at the period that you were, the interview that I put online of you with the picture of you and Mary Farrell and Michael A. Dowes, basically, I was surprised about how cordial the whole interview went, and how you let it finish, and the questions were really concise and all that. And then at the same time, basically got me searching YouTube about whether you've done other stuff, and that's when I came across Dennis Morissette's YouTube channel, where basically he put up some interviews of you with 3 Dallas police, Gerald Hill, Jesse Curry, and M.M. McDonald. These were taken at around the same time as you did with Mary Farrell?
Yes. In fact, I was probably sitting in her house when I did them.
Right. What was the take on them and back then, and what do you think about it now, basically, and especially with regards to Hill and McDonald?
For the most part, I interviewed several fellows, several officers, and I also interviewed a fellow back then that was at Toogie Naval Air Station with Oswald. But I was surprised at how willing some of them were to talk. Some were hesitant. C.T. Walker, that was a very quick conversation. I could tell he was not comfortable. He said, if you want to talk to me, you're going to have to come see me in person, which I didn't. But Gerald Hill was, I just introduced myself. I'm a teacher from Illinois. I was wondering if I could talk to you about the Kennedy assassination. And, well, I don't see why not. And off we went for about 30 minutes. And he seemed very comfortable during the interview. The one that, one thing that I'll always remember from doing those interviews was with Jesse Curry. And I started asking him about what he felt about the Warren Report. What do you think? And he said that generally he pretty much went along with it, but he felt that George DeMoran should have been investigated more, which probably everyone in your room there feels the same way. And I asked him, do you think there was a connection there? And he said that DeMoran had some questionable relationships with people, and that he definitely knew Oswald. And for the most part, I was surprised at their candor, or their candor. Some of them were kind of hesitant at first, and you could hear it in their voice. And so before they hung up or decided to say, no, I'm not going to talk to you, I just started asking questions. And I tried to keep it fairly, innocuous at first, and they went pretty well.
You just said you talked to someone who was with Oswald at Atsugi. Who is this?
His name was Ron Crawley.
What can you tell us
I
about
interviewed him in November of '76 and in May of '77, I think it was. And I don't know if those are on that website or not. I'll have to go to that website. When you say it's
on YouTube.
Look at the website.
Yeah, it's a channel. It's a channel by Dennis Morissette. But if you just put your own name in the search engine and put in Gerald Hill, then that particular interview will pop up, and if you click on the channel of that particular person, it'll show you which interviews he's basically published. But as far as I know, I've only heard MacDonald, Curry, and Hill, and of course the Mary Farrell interview as such. Is this, by the way, is this the other? Yeah, go on.
One of the other interviews that I really looked forward to doing was with an officer named L. Hill. And the reason that really interested me was because he was patrol car or call number 22. And on the radio transcriptions, car 22 is sent to Cobb Stadium, which was further down the motorcade route, about a suspect there with a rifle, I think is the exact wording of the transcript. And he's the car that goes down there, and you don't really find out much more about it. And so I wanted to ask him about that, and he said that he never went to Cobb Stadium. And I said, well, according to the Dallas police radio transcripts, you did. And he was one that was really hesitant to talk at first, I could tell. And when I asked him to talk about his movements, there was a long pause. And then he started talking, and seemed to loosen up a little bit. And he said that he was reported to Oak Cliff because he had heard that Tippett had been shot. And then he got there about the time the ambulance was going away. And we talked a little bit about Jack Ruby, and then I got into the Cobb Stadium thing, where there was a male seen with a rifle. And he said, no, I wasn't there. I didn't go to Cobb Stadium. He said, I worked over in West Dallas, and so did Tippett. So he said he didn't do it. So I don't know if there's an error in the transcription, or was there a suspect down there with a rifle? I don't know.
Right.
Mary Farrell was also just, I can't say enough positive about her. I don't know if any of you folks ever got to meet her. I will, for always in my life, be grateful to her, how she took me in. I just, somehow I found her address, and I wrote her shortly after getting interested in the assassination back in '75. And I got this really nice letter back from her rather quickly about, said something like, I get these kinds of inquiries from all over the world, and most of them I don't even respond to, but yours seems so genuine. Yeah, come on down. So we came down and we booked a room at Love Field, and we booked a room in some hotel, and like a day or so after we were there, she told us to move out of there. She was putting us in a room at Love Field. She paid for it. She was just wonderful and, so knowledgeable. So that was just really neat to pick her brain. And Mary thought, Mary told me she had interest in this as soon as it happened, because just the first reports that were coming out just didn't seem to make sense to her either. And she believed there might have actually been a shooter at the Deltex building. She wasn't sure. We talked about David Ferry some, and she definitely felt there was a connection between he and Oswald, and then that photo shows up to pretty much verify that. I think that was the result
civil
of the
patrol
program. Yes.
Wow.
But she was just wonderful. And I'm glad to see that her memory is kept alive through the Mary Farrell Foundation with Rex Bradford.
Yeah, that's of great help to me.
Oh man, that's a fabulous website, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, before we get to talk about your book, I just got one question. You were also very interested in Jean Swaiter and Michael Mertz. That's another episode.
Oh yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. I don't remember for sure how that came on my radar to begin with, but I put together a 9,000 card index card system. I still have it. In fact, I'm thinking about donating it to the 6th floor museum in Daily Plaza. But somehow that came on my radar with Swatra or Sutra, or however you say his name, in Mertz and Rowe, the AKAs. And somehow, I had heard about the Assassination Archives and Research Center, who was run by Bud Fensterwald at the time, contacted me because there was an article article in the Washington Times newspaper, I think back in '88, that mentioned that I had this index, and they wanted to know if I would share a copy of it, and I said sure. So I took a chance and I mailed them the whole thing, 9,000 index cards, and they put it all on a computer and mailed it back to me. Well, that's how I got the first no but offense to Wells. And he also had an interest in SWATRA. And so I started writing the CIA for documents. And, you know, this is quite a few years ago, but if my memory is correct, it was Bud or Mary or Gary Shaw or somebody that told me that I was the first to get these documents that pretty much spelled out that SWATRA, a.k.a. Mertz, a.k.a. Rowe, was in Fort Worth on the morning of the assassination and in Dallas that afternoon, and that our authorities hustled them out of the country to either Mexico or Canada, I think it said. And so, I mean, that was just like a bolt of lightning. You know, here's a guy who very likely tried to kill de Gaulle or was involved in trying to kill de Gaulle, and now he was in the United States and at Fort Worth and Dallas the day Kennedy's killed. It was either Mary or Bud or Gary Shaw or one of those guys who told me they really feel that those documents about SWATRA were released by mistake. That whoever decided to release them didn't really know the potential lightning bolt they were letting loose there. So, you know, just over the years I would write the CIA for more just to see if something else had been released. And every once in a while I get a little something. But Bud actually, again, if I remember right, this is years ago, actually found him. My memory tells me that he was running a mafia-owned casino in France. And he denied being there. But this Michael Mertz was there, and they were on opposite sides of this OAS thing. And, you know, I don't think anybody ever reached any conclusions about it. But that was a real interest of mine for some time.
Okay, let's talk
And I
about
think there's been 2 books written on that too, Triangle of Death, and then another one
Yeah.
that's not nearly as good.
Let's talk about your book. Tell us a little bit about
Okay.
this. Is this a compilation of all your work all done, or is there any new stuff, or is explain
No,
it to us.
there isn't any new stuff in it. What it is my 1977 manuscript.
Right.
I decided I wanted to, again, just thinking of Mary and her typing it for me, and I remember she thought it was really good. And I got a publisher in Chicago that was interested in working with me on it. But he said the FBI's just released 90,000 pages of documents, and you should read through those before we proceed. Well, at 10 cents a page, that was $9,000, and I think I was making $13,000 that year as a teacher. So that was the end of the book thing, and it's just all the handwritten version, Mary's typed version is just all sat in the box for 40 years, and because I got so re-involved again, I thought, you know what, I'm going to publish that darn thing. It's so much easier to do that now. So I hired a gal at our office to take the typed version and put it on a flash drive, and from there it's pretty easy. And it's in 2 parts. It's what the Warren Commission's findings, conclusions, and recommendations are. And then the part 2 are many of the inconsistencies that I found in my early investigations, and they're all sourced with footnotes, and the book has an index. And the publisher, I asked him for an honest assessment of it. I'm a big boy, don't worry about hurting my feelings. What do you think? And of course, most people don't know hardly much of anything about the assassination, unlike you and me and your friends there at your conference. So even though this is stuff I found years ago, to most people, they're going to be surprised on what's in there. You know, for example, Jim Braden. You folks familiar with who Jim Braden is?
Of course, yes.
Okay. Not many people knew about that back then. Until Peter Noyes came out with that book. I think it was called Legacy of Doubt. So the answer to your question is no. There's nothing new in there. It's what I found in the late 70s.
Do you think it's still, so from what I gather, you are convinced that it will still stand up to 2019 standards and knowledge of the JFK assassination?
I think there are some things in there that have been proven one way or the other. There's been so much more material that's come out, millions of pages of stuff. Some on the tramps, back in those days, the thinking was that they were never booked or anything else, but then information came out that they were and who their names were, and there was speculation that it was Sturgis and Hunt and the CIA and all that. So some of the stuff that's in there has been disproven or verified one way or another.
Okay. And what are you planning to do more on this? Is actually my final question. Are you planning to do more research and try to get in touch with
Yes.
people? Or, yeah?
Yes. I've started doing presentations again. I've done a couple here locally. I have a couple more scheduled. Again, just my way of doing it is not necessarily to convince you of something, but I want to present you with what I've learned and what I think to be true, and you can decide from there. But part of the presentation added to it with what I'm about to talk about here.
Right.
I tell people that, I suspect there was someone on the grassy knoll, but I can't 100% prove it. I suspect that there's more to George de Mohrenschildt than we've been told, but I can't necessarily prove it. But what I think I can prove to you with documents that I'll show you is that there was definitely a cover-up by the investigative agencies, particularly the CIA. And then I go into some backstory and can conclude with referring to some documents. 44 days, I've gotten a lot of this just off the internet because it's so readily available now. And paying a lot of attention to Jefferson Morley's work. He and John Newman have done such a good job of keeping an eye on the CIA and trying to get more and more from them. Like, are you guys aware of Jefferson Morley?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Author?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll,
Well, the documents that I present in PowerPoint begin with a document that 44 days before the assassination, the CIA learns that Oswald is in Mexico City, and he meets with a Russian by the name of Valery Kostakov. And not only is he a consular official, he's a KGB agent. And not only is he a KGB agent, but he's in charge of Department 13, which is assassination and, sabotage, something like that. So this they know in October of 1963. Then they find out from a report that comes from New Orleans that Oswald has moved from New Orleans and he's back in Texas, and he's living in Dallas. Okay? Then, we all know that Hosty finds Marina and interviews her. Never does bump into Oswald as far as we know. And so by early November, we know that Oswald, here's this guy who's met with an assassination expert from Russia, our arch enemy. He's living in Dallas. And not only is he living in Dallas, he's working on Kennedy's parade route at the Texas School Book Depository. And they didn't do anything about it. Think about that. If, put it in today's text. Let's say there's, Jeff Meek goes to Syria. He meets with an ISIS assassination expert and comes back to Little Rock, Arkansas where President Trump is going to have a motorcade. And Jeff Meek not only lives in Little Rock, where President Trump's coming, but he's working in a tall building on Trump's motorcade route. Do you think I'd be investigated? Do you think I'd be, I don't know about being in jail at the time of the visit, but do you think I would just be allowed to be up in that building and never questioned? In my opinion, there's no way. When I interviewed Mike Howard, he was the advance agent there at Fort Worth, and he told me that there were about 30 people in Fort Worth that they, wanted to keep tabs on, and they just made up things to pull them in, but they kept an eye on these people. And I'll bet you none of them went to Russia, and I bet you none of them met with Valery Kostikov. But yet here's Oswald who did, and they didn't do anything. And I sometimes wonder, is that part of why there's such a cover-up by these investigative agencies? Because they know they blew it.
Yes,
and
at the same
if
time...
there was an accomplice, if I was Oswald's accomplice, if there is a conspiracy, which I believe there is, if you and me are in this together, and I'm arrested, it's not very likely, I would argue that it's not very likely that you, on your own, would go ahead with the assassination attempt when your cohort just got arrested. I would think you would get the heck out of town. So I feel part of the cover-up is at least the fact that, if we knew everything, it would just, it shows to me, in my opinion, that they blew it. Had they connected the dots, Oswald would be interrogated during Kennedy's visit. And not up in that book depository.
Yeah. I
Does
think
that make sense?
part of it, no, some of it does, but I think part of it is also with the benefit of hindsight of 55 years.
Yes,
I don't
you're
think,
right.
I don't
That's
think,
true.
I don't
That's
think
true.
they're as clued up. They weren't as clued up as we are now. I
Yeah, and
know
there's
that,
always those inter-agency, rivalries
yeah,
and that kind of
that's
thing.
another thing. It's
Um,
like they kept it separate from each other. They would not share information at all. Especially Dallas Police and FBI. It's known in several instances. The whole way that Hosey came into the basement of the parking garage of City Hall and basically said to Jack Raffle that basically that they knew they had Oswald on their list and that he was capable of killing and blah blah blah, and that whole story blew out of proportion, and basically the head honchos of the Dallas FBI basically called up Jesse Curry and told him to get a retraction as such, and that the cooperation between Dallas PD and FBI was basically, as you probably say, shot to shit. So it took him Jesse Curry's resignation to departure. Jesse Curry's departure for the cooperation between FBI and Dallas Police to get back together again and on a normal level, because until then there was no cooperation anymore between the feds and the local police. There's a lot that it's not as straightforward as I like to see or you may want to see, but there are elements of it. Where you basically can say that, well, they didn't really cooperate with each other. At the same time, I've read the documents that the FBI actually wanted to help the Secret Service as such and offered their help, and they were told off and says, don't bother, don't help us, don't get involved, blah blah blah, at the same time. So, it comes from very many different angles. Basically, it's very hard to say like, well, this is the way it went, and there's too many players.
It's striking to me how much the government did know about Oswald even before the assassination. I came upon this one document. The cover page says it's 16 pages long. And this isn't a 16-page document on Oswald. It is a document consisting of 16 pages listing all the documents that the government has on Oswald. 16 pages. It just floors me.
Yeah. It's not bad for a lone nut killer.
Well, you know, and yeah, and you know, when I interviewed Bill Newman, when I asked him the question somewhat early on in the interview, and what do you think happened? And he said, well, when I talk about this, I like to do it from the perspective of a witness rather than a researcher. Okay, so we talk a little more, and I asked him again, Bill, you know, I know you don't know for sure, and you know, neither do I. But what do you think happened? And I loved his answer. And he said basically this, that if it was Lee Harvey Oswald alone, you know, this guy who could barely feed his family, why 55 years later are there documents still being withheld if it's just this lone nut?
Yeah.
That's a damn good question.
Well, yeah, that, and not just that, but also the fact that there's 7 million pages of it. That's not a bad,
Yeah.
that's not a bad accomplishment either for a lone nut killer. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
if it's that clear cut, you know, if it's so easy, so straightforward, you don't need 7 million pages.
No, sure don't. I agree with you totally.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in that case, on that note, I want to thank you very much for talking to us.
Sure.
Thank you, Jim.
My pleasure. I hope maybe to come to one of your conferences one day. My wife wants to visit your country and love to meet some of you
Yeah.
folks.
But real cheap.
Next year. It's real cheap
Yes.
at the moment.
Well, let's stay in touch.
Yes, thank you very much.